không có quốc tịch mà giờ cô biết
đi 2 lần rớt rồi
không mãi cô thấy biết Việt mãi đó chị
đâu có thi đến nào
cô qua 50 năm rồi
mới có 11 năm nè
là nó trên 5 năm ta cho thì
đâu có 15 năm lận 15 năm
có tiếng Anh thì hơi khó bây giờ hàng ngày kinh tí có đứng dậy hơi khó ha
thì lớn tuổi rồi hai cái chân
đó
lớn tuổi rồi hai cái chân nó hay bị sự cố nhiều khi đi không có control được rồi té đó
nay mình nói mình giống mà Diệu Sinh đó cô Thảo lại mình không biết tên Diệu Sinh là Thảo sao bà biết được tên hay vậy
chỉ cho địa số điện thoại này số điện thoại giờ không biết nó đâu có nhớ có mà ba số đầu 212
212 thì ai trả 212 nhưng mà 212 là cái số ở nhà mình thôi còn để khi mình đi vắng thì cái số trong tay thì là 917
Don't touch. Thôi.
đem cái trái đậu đồng này cho cái bà
từ giống á hả bà này một lâm nó chết ngắt hả
thì chết mới lòi ra thằng khô này đó chứ hôm đó cũng có hái trái ăn được
chị không vô mình trồng mùa hè đó chị cứ thay trái nặng
được
cái gì vậy
đậu rồng
cái này mà bắt nó ăn cái canh na này không dụng á
canh chua xào rồi
đó ăn sống luôn
ăn sống đúng rồi
cái này bác ít lắm bác ít lắm
quê là không dụng
rồi bác là ăn rau muống là nhiều nhất gần như là cái
rau muống ở nước này
nào
vậy
không đồng dưỡng cho lúc mình vào
biết nào rau muống mình dễ ăn hơn á xào sống rồi nấu canh
nhưng mà không nên ăn sống tại vì cái rau muống nó không sống ở dưới nước thành ra những cái con trùng các thứ đó con vi khuẩn ở kia đó nó chui vào trong đó rất là nhiều thì ăn thành ra nên ăn luộc hay là ăn xào mình cũng trần lên xong rồi mình
trời ơi chị biết không bây giờ mình nên bắt chước người Bắc người ta ăn luộc không à cái gì cũng luộc hết rau củ rồi thịt thà gì luộc tại vì hồi ở Việt Nam có cái ông gì đó ở gần ăn vậy mà khỏe mạnh lắm chứ đừng có loại đặt xào biết
không sao thì cũng được
vì nó ngon nhưng mà nó dầu mỡ
nhiều nhưng mà ăn ít thôi
dần dà ăn chút thôi là ăn cho nó ngon miệng chút rồi mình nuốt nó vô
bởi giờ nói là thôi đừng có kiêng nữa
chị 917 là quý
7545 3735
số tụi em là 347
phân nữa
Okay.
cái này điện thoại bàn giờ số tầm tay
Okay.
347
Alright, well, but in the interest of time, we're just going to begin anyway. Welcome back. It's been like 2 whole weeks since the last lecture. Just to remind everyone, what we talked about last time. We talked about the 3 gems, right? And just to summarize the 3 gems, it's basically that idea that like if we want to begin on this spiritual path of Buddhism, you gotta take refuge in 3 things, right? It's the Buddha, the Dharma, which is what the Buddha taught, and the Sangha, which is the spiritual community, the monks who are able to look at the Dharma and then spread the teaching of the Buddha as well. Well, take the 3 gems, which we talked about like 3 weeks ago. It's basically how you would undertake your spiritual journey. But then the question is then, what are like the other like practical applications of the faith that you guys can undertake? Hence, the beginning of this lecture, which is about the 5 precepts. Okay, very fancy term, 5 precepts. They're basically like rules that govern like the way that Buddhist people demonstrate self-control. It's actually the equivalent of like the 10 Commandments in like Christianity, right? But instead of the 10 Commandments, we have something called the 5 precepts. And it's basically the basis for everything good that you're supposed to be doing, right? If you're in the faith of Buddhism. And it's very much like the commandments, right? It's a list of things that you should not do. And it's basically a list of things that you are not violating, right? A list of non-violation. And what's the purpose of having this like list of like non-violation? Well, the purpose is to A, protect yourself, but ultimately to protect other people, like prevent other people from receiving harm. And hence it's gonna set you down onto this like path of like spiritual purity, right? Okay, so what's the point of following the 5 precepts, right? And I will obviously explain what the 5 precepts are to begin with, but like what's the point of that? What's the purpose, right? There's multiple purposes. Like in general, why do people follow the 10 Commandments? It's the same idea. Why do people follow the 5 precepts? First is like really to help develop your faith. And second, to generate merit. And then lastly, you want to increase your moral strength. And the other like explanations are that like it helps you to generate inner wisdom, obtain respect, and ultimately like produce harmony and achieve a certain level of peace. Okay? So let me before I'll just tell you like what the 5 precepts are, and then I'll go into like the point really. Precept number 1, and I'll explain thoroughly what each one entails, right? But precept number 1, do not kill. Precept number 2, do not steal. Precept number 3, no sexual misconduct. Precept number 4, do not lie. And precept number 5, do not consume intoxicants, okay? Or just consuming just drugs and alcohol. Can you believe that about 2,500 years ago, they came up with these like 5 precepts? They're basically rules that like you guys have to like follow, and it helps govern your lives. Now, like I mentioned before, it sounds like a loss of freedom almost, like getting like these set of rules to follow. But it's very interesting because if you choose to like undertake this like spiritual path and follow these 5 rules and the 5 basic rules, right? It's actually not the loss of freedom, it's actually getting more freedom. Why is it the case that you actually have more freedom when you follow this? Well, this goes back to the time of like the formation of government, right? Just very quickly, it's like a slightly off topic, but it connects too. You guys ever wonder why, like, if you walk down the street, people aren't just like killing each other, or why you're not just being like robbed like blatantly, or why you can walk down the street and feel safe? Well, we feel relatively safe because there's a government, right? And there are rules that tell us, oh, you can't steal, you can't kill, etc. And very much like within a natural society, within like today, where you live in a country, especially this country, where you feel relatively very safe because no one's actually violating any of these rules. It's basically the social contract. So imagine if there was no government. If there's no government that tells you, and no laws, no police, then you live in a very like dangerous world where anybody can do anything to each other. They can basically violate the other person, and then you don't ultimately feel safe. So what the 5 precepts is all about, these 5 rules, is that, hey, if everybody individually follows these 5 rules, the world will be a safer place, right? So that's pretty much the 5 precepts. It's a social contract. But the thing is this, the idea of the 5 precepts is that you have to make the choice to follow it yourself, right? And even though like the 5 rules that I just mentioned before, like do not kill, do not steal, sounds like, oh, that's such an easy thing to do. Until we get into the details of, what are the actual details? Because while these are like big overarching rules, the little rules inside these rules make it kind of difficult, right? So let's take a look at what each of these really mean to begin with. Okay, rule number 1, refrain from killing. Sounds easy, right? Like, who actually, like, no one, or at least not in this community, thinks about like murder and stuff like that. But let's just dive a little bit deeply into this, right? It's like the idea of rule number 1, or the first precept, which is do not refrain from killing, or the point is like do not harm or violate other people's lives, right? Murder, obviously, big no-no. However, like even an assault, or like when you're fighting with somebody and you're leaving them scarred, that's a violation of this precept, right? But here's something that's very interesting. We're supposed to follow this rule, do not kill. But how many of you guys have accidentally killed an ant, or a fly, or a cockroach? That happens literally, not literally every day, but at least once in our lifetime, we've like definitely killed something or other. If not by accident, like, you know, just a small little animal. And these are like, to some extent, it is unavoidable, but also avoidable at the same time, right? There's a distinction between like grave offenses and minor offenses, right? As long as you are repentant about doing some of these things, you're not in a bad position. So here's the deal. Sometimes we do accidentally kill ants, right? Just by walking. Sometimes you accidentally kill roach. But as long as this is on the top of your mind, like, hey, I cannot kill, don't do it. Like, this is like almost like a interesting lecture because I'm lecturing to the choir. Like, you guys already know, like, killing is bad. And yet the question becomes, why are there so many murders across the US or anywhere else, right? Why is it that this basic rule, do not violate anybody's lives, and yet it happens all the time? Why do people have to explicitly tell you, like, this is bad, right? But you gotta think deeply about this. Like, even though like this is a precept, you have to not only recognize it, but choose to follow it, right? And have conviction. Here's another thing. Even though you guys know that killing is bad, the question becomes this. How many of you guys actually are full vegetarians? Of course you guys eat meat, right? And what's eating meat? Well, it basically requires having to kill animals to eat. So, to some extent, while it's a very easy idea to follow, like do not kill, embedded with this idea of refrain from killing, is this idea that, hey, if you guys, and it's not like set in stone that you have to be a vegetarian, it's just something to think about, right? Like, part of having to eat meat means some animal had to die. And so, this is something that for you guys to really think about. And so, I think if you're like a Buddhist monk who's like a full vegetarian, then that's one way of like observing this precept of do not kill. And you don't have to necessarily be full vegetarian. Like there's like movements out there that's like called like reductarian, where it's like it's not avoiding meat altogether, but it's reducing how much meat you eat. Just think about that, okay? So that's the first precept that I want to touch on. Second precept is refrain from stealing. Very obvious, right? Like, refrain from stealing, okay? But the idea is this: do not take what is not given to you. So, like, just to give off the list of things. I don't know if any of you guys have ever done it, but it's things to avoid, right? Shoplifting, corruption, which you guys are not able to do, bribes, illegal business opportunities, gambling, loan sharking, and any form of like ill-gotten gains. Seems easy, right? Like, I'm never going to engage in any of this like type of stealing. But you don't understand, like, sometimes if you see a pen, let's just say if you're in school and you see a pen or a pencil on somebody's table, and you're like, that looks like a good pen. I kind of need it right now, so you'll just take it. Or if you work in an office and you're like, hey, they have so many pens and pencils here, let me just take a couple to use at home. That's a form of stealing, right? So that's the idea. Like, you kind of want to like be mindful. Like, when you follow these like 5 precepts, like refrain from killing, refrain from stealing, be mindful that like they could be hidden in like little everyday things that you might do that you might not be conscious of. Or for example, let's just say you're walking down the street and you're like, ooh, that's a beautiful flower. Let me just pick that flower. A lot of people tend to do that. They pick flowers. And sometimes it's like shown in movies. They pick flowers and they give it to like their date or something. But guess what you're doing? In the action of picking flower from somebody else's garden, you're stealing from that person's garden, right? So sometimes there's like larger offenses and there's also minor offenses that you kind of want to avoid too. Okay? The next precept number 3, says refrain from sexual misconduct. So a lot of these things you guys are too young to even entertain, right? Just like talking about abuse or trafficking, etc. Like, obviously, no. That doesn't mean that you can't have, like, for example, marriage or romantic love, but the idea is nothing unwholesome, right? Do everything that's, like, it's okay to have, like, a romantic love and marriage, etc., but none of the trafficking or abuse that you guys sometimes hear in the news. And once again, I would question, like, even though this is, like, so common sense, why are there so many criminals out there who engage in these behaviors, right? Because they're not dedicating themselves to following these 5 precepts. Precept number 4, refrain from lying, okay? There's like a couple definitions here that we should go to. Like, what does it mean to refrain from lying, right? It's when you see something and you say that you didn't see it. Or the opposite, which is when you don't see something and yet you say that you did see it. That's basically the form of lying, right? You're saying that you've seen stuff when you haven't, or when you see something and you don't actually tell the truth, right? Other ways that this manifests itself, right? Refrain from lying. If you ever like spread rumors or you tell tales about other people, that's just like a form of actually lying to some extent, right? And you like create what they say discord, or a lot of times like, well, in other language, like when you're creating like just conflict between 2 people, you go from one person, you tell them, oh, so and so said this, and then another person's like, so and so said this. You're creating conflict, right? Now, and under this idea of like creating conflict, you're basically lying. And this is like one of the major precepts that you should try to avoid. So ultimately, like, they also distinguish between like white lies too, right? Sometimes if somebody says something that let's just say, the classic example is like somebody asks you like, oh, do I look good in this like outfit or something? Like, you don't want to like really hurt their feelings and say like no or something. So you can maybe say like a white lie, like, oh, you look fine, don't worry about it. But so what's the distinction, right? As long as there's no evil intent behind what you are lying about, right? So if you're gossiping or you're talking about somebody's reputation, that's lying. If you're under oath, and you're just lying about what you see or what you haven't seen, yeah, don't do that. But I think, like, in what I read, like, if you're gonna have a white lie, that's okay too, right? As long as there's no evil intent behind what you do. Okay? Lastly, the last one is an interesting one, because I see a lot of interesting teenagers in the room. A lot of the little ones, no, don't worry about it. Last one is refrain from consuming intoxicants, right? What are intoxicants? There's alcohol, drugs, tobacco, cigarettes. Consumption, ultimately. Consumption of any of these three things, right? Drugs, alcohol, tobacco. What does it do? It destroys your health, so don't do it. Destroys your finances, your relationships, things that you own. Like, none of that there's no point in doing, right? And yet, it's a very social activity that you got a lot of Americans do it. They're like, not just Americans, like people all over the world, right? They say like, oh, there's happy hour, come grab a drink with us, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's very easy to fall prey to this idea or to the pressure of like, oh, have a drink when you guys go to high school or college, or not high school, or college, or even when you become an adult. There will be pressure for you guys to like drink or consume things. One of the major precepts in Buddhism, or one of the major, well, this is refraining from consuming intoxicants. You might think, if I drink one drink, it doesn't hurt anybody, right? So why is this a major precept to begin with? Why do they say don't drink? Well, the idea of drinking, and when I say drinking, like alcohol, is that alcohol tends to impair your judgment. And what happens when your judgment is impaired? Well, it kind of leads you to violating the other major precepts. For example, lying, killing, or stealing. Like, how can that be the case? Well, one example very clearly is drunk driving, right? Not that drunk driving existed back then in 2,500 years ago, but the idea is very much the same, right? If you are drinking, you get in the car, get behind the wheels, your judgment's impaired, you're driving, you accidentally hit and kill somebody. Now, not only have you like violated the precept of not consuming intoxicants, but you've also killed a life. Not that you intended to kill a life, but you certainly did, right? So the idea behind like not consuming intoxicants, it does damage to you first and foremost, but it has the potential to damage other people's lives, okay? And so that's it. Just to summarize, I mean, the spirit, the thrust behind this whole 5 precepts, like I mentioned before, right? It's the equivalent of the 10 Commandments, but within the Buddhist tradition, it's just all these 5 things that you try to not avoid. And to some extent, it's an exercise of self-control as well. For example, you see a cockroach, right? Let's just say you see a roach crawling across the room. And I see this in some, one time there were these kids, we were going to some natural forest reserve, and they saw a worm, and all these kids were like really, really disgusted by the worm. They're like, ew, and then they all backed up. But then this one kid, I don't know what he was trying to do, like trying to impress somebody or something. He literally comes up to the worm and like smash it up, or like steps on it with his feet. And I'm thinking, why would you do that? Like, that's really bad. Like, why would you kill a little animal? I know it's a minor offense and all, but it's really important that you try to avoid these things, right? These little things happen in our everyday lives. You have to, and I think somewhere along the way, no one's ever told him, don't do this type of stuff, right? So if you see a little cockroach, try your very best to avoid it. Or what my mom would do is that instead of actually killing a cockroach or something, she'll scoop it up and leave it outside the window for it to find another place to be instead of our home, right? there's also like a silly side story that I do at my workplace. And apparently at my workplace we have like this little room, and we have a coffee machine there, right? But every morning, there's like 1 or 2 ants that like fall into this coffee machine, and they're like just floating on the top of the water. So, following the example of my mom, instead of like just like tossing them away, which most of my coworkers do, I literally take a spoon and I scoop them up, and I just like put them on the side or something like that. That way, hey, these little ants, they survive, right? I think the ultimate idea is if you choose to follow like these 5 precepts, it helps you cultivate merit as well, and you become more conscious and mindful of like the things that you're actually doing. Sometimes like you see a pen and you take it, you pick it up, you don't really know that it's a bad thing. Sometimes you're like, oh, it's not bad. Somebody's pen just left it there. I'll pick it up. But hey, you're violating one of the 5 precepts, right? So try your best to avoid these things. So that's pretty much it. Yeah, so I don't know if you guys have any questions, but just to summarize, right? 3 weeks ago we talked about like the 3 gems of Buddhism, which is like following, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then today we talked about the 5 precepts, which are like the basic practical applications of like things that like if you are undertaking this spiritual journey within Buddhism, you should not be doing, right? And those are the 5 major ones. Any questions? If not, I'm done with the subject. Cool. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for being attentive.